In the middle of a chaotic emergency room, the powerful chief surgeon suddenly grabbed a male nurse by the hair and yanked hard in front of everyone. No one dared to breathe. He was a quiet man, always avoiding conflict, just a single father working night shifts so he could pick up his son every morning. Everyone thought he would endure it like he always did. But in that exact moment, something inside him changed. What happens when a man is pushed to his absolute limit? The emergency room at St. Matthew's Medical Center never slept. Machines beeped in irregular rhythms, nurses rushed between beds, and the smell of antiseptic hung heavy in the air. It was 2 a.m, and Ethan Cole moved through the chaos like a ghost. He checked vitals, adjusted IV lines, and responded to calls with quiet efficiency. His colleagues barely noticed him, which was exactly how he preferred it. At 35 years old, Ethan had mastered the art of being invisible. He took the shifts no one wanted, handled the patients no one else had patience for, and never complained. The other nurses called him the pushover behind his back. He knew he did not care. Dr. Marcus Vance walked through the ER like he owned it, because in many ways he did. As chief of surgery, his reputation preceded him everywhere he went. Brilliant hands, wealthy family, political connections that reached the hospital board. He stopped near the nurses' station and scanned the room until his eyes landed on Ethan. Without a word, he pointed at a pile of paperwork on the counter, then at Ethan. It was not his job. Filing insurance forms belonged to administrative staff, but Ethan walked over, picked up the stack, and nodded. Dr. Vance smirked and continued his rounds. A younger nurse named Mia Parker watched from across the room, her jaw tight with anger she could not express. Ethan caught her eye and gave a small shake of his head. Not worth it. Never worth it. By 6 a.m, Ethan's shift ended. He changed out of his scrubs in the locker room, splashed water on his face, and checked his phone. One message from Mrs. Henderson, the elderly neighbor who watched Lucas during his overnight shifts. "Your boy is awake and asking for pancakes." Ethan smiled for the first time in 12 hours. He grabbed his jacket and drove through the empty streets as the sun began to rise over the city. The apartment complex where they lived was modest, a 2-bedroom unit on the 3rd floor with a view of the parking lot. But it was theirs. He had fought for it in the divorce, fought harder for custody, and won both. That was 3 years ago. Now it was just him and Lucas against the world. Lucas was waiting by the door when Ethan walked in. 6 years old, with messy brown hair and his mother's green eyes. He launched himself at his father's legs and held on tight. Ethan scooped him up and carried him to the kitchen, where Mrs. Henderson had already started the pancake batter. She was 72, widowed, and refused to accept payment for babysitting. Ethan repaid her by fixing things around her apartment and driving her to doctor's appointments. It was an unspoken arrangement that worked for everyone. She waved goodbye and left them to their morning ritual. Ethan flipped pancakes while Lucas sat at the counter, swinging his legs and chattering about a dream he had involving dinosaurs and rocket ships. Halfway through breakfast, Lucas suddenly stopped talking, his eyes fixed on Ethan's wrist, where the sleeve of his shirt had ridden up to reveal a faded bruise. The mark was old, nearly healed, but still visible against his pale skin. Lucas reached out and touched it gently with his small fingers. His voice came out quiet, almost scared. "Daddy, why do you always have bruises?" Ethan looked down at his son's worried face and felt something twist in his chest. He pulled his sleeve down and ruffled the boy's hair with his free hand. "Daddy works hard, that's all. It's nothing to worry about, buddy." Lucas did not look convinced, but he returned to his pancakes without asking more questions. Ethan watched him eat and made a silent promise that things would get better. Somehow. Eventually. 2 nights later, Ethan was back in the ER when the ambulance brought in a critical case. Male patient, early 40s, severe chest trauma from a car accident. The paramedics rattled off vitals as they wheeled him through the doors. Blood pressure dropping, oxygen levels critical, internal bleeding suspected. Dr. Vance arrived within minutes, already barking orders at the team. He was in his element here, commanding the room with the confidence of a man who had never been questioned. Ethan prepared the equipment and assisted where needed, but something caught his attention as he monitored the patient. The readings did not match the diagnosis. The symptoms were pointing somewhere else entirely. Ethan moved closer to the bed and studied the patient's chest movement, the color of his lips, the pattern of his breathing. He had seen this before, years ago, in a field hospital in Afghanistan, where he served as a combat medic. The memories flooded back uninvited, sand and blood, and the screams of wounded soldiers. He had spent 4 years in that hell before coming home and becoming a civilian nurse. Most people did not know about his past. He never talked about it. But the skills he learned there never left him. And right now, those skills were telling him that this patient was not suffering from internal bleeding. He was suffering from tension pneumothorax. Air was trapped in his chest cavity, collapsing his lung. And if they didn't act immediately, he would die. Ethan approached Dr. Vance carefully, keeping his voice low and respectful. "Dr. Vance, I think the patient might be showing signs of tension pneumothorax, the tracheal deviation, the decreased breath sounds on the left side. Maybe we should consider a needle decompression before—" Dr. Vance did not let him finish. He turned around slowly, his face darkening with barely contained rage. The entire room fell silent. Nurses stopped moving. Residents held their breath. When he spoke, his voice was ice cold. "You're a nurse. I'm the chief of surgery. Know your place." The words hung in the air like a verdict. Ethan swallowed the humiliation and stepped back. But he did not stop watching the patient. And he did not stop seeing the signs that everyone else was missing. 3 minutes passed. The patient's condition deteriorated rapidly, exactly as Ethan had predicted. His blood pressure crashed. His lips turned blue. The monitors screamed warnings that no one seemed to understand. Ethan could not stay silent anymore. He stepped forward again, his voice louder this time, cutting through the chaos. "Dr. Vance, the patient is going to die. He needs a needle decompression now. His lung is collapsing." Everyone stared at him. No one had ever spoken to Dr. Vance like that. The chief surgeon turned around slowly, his face twisted with fury. He walked toward Ethan with deliberate steps, closing the distance between them until they were face to face. His voice came out as a hiss through clenched teeth. "You dare tell me how to do my job?" What happened next would be replayed in the minds of everyone present for years to come. Dr. Marcus Vance, chief of surgery at St. Matthew's Medical Center, reached out and grabbed Ethan Cole by the hair. He yanked down hard, forcing the nurse to his knees in front of the entire emergency room. The sound of gasps filled the air. Someone dropped a metal tray. It clattered against the floor like a gunshot. Ethan felt the pain explode through his scalp, felt the shame burn through his chest, felt the eyes of every colleague boring into him. This was the moment he was supposed to submit, to apologize, to accept his place in the hierarchy and be grateful he still had a job. That was what everyone expected. That was what he had always done before. But behind him, the patient was dying. The monitors wailed. The seconds ticked away. And somewhere across town, a 6-year-old boy was sleeping in his bed, trusting that his father would come home in the morning. Ethan thought about Lucas. He thought about the bruises he always had to explain away. He thought about the years of silence, the years of bending, the years of being invisible. And something inside him finally broke. Not his spirit, his chains. Ethan grabbed Dr. Vance's wrist and twisted it away from his hair. He rose to his feet, looked the surgeon directly in the eyes, and spoke with a calm he did not know he possessed. "That patient is going to die unless someone saves him. Get out of my way." Then he turned his back on the most powerful man in the hospital and walked straight toward the dying man on the table. Ethan's hands moved with precision, born from years of battlefield medicine. He grabbed a 14-gauge needle from the emergency cart and located the second intercostal space on the patient's left chest. The technique was called Needle decompression, a procedure that nurses were not authorized to perform. But authorization meant nothing when a man was seconds away from death. Ethan inserted the needle with steady fingers, felt the rush of trapped air escaping, and watched as the patient's oxygen levels began to stabilize. The monitors stopped screaming. The blue tint faded from the man's lips. He was going to live. The relief lasted exactly 4 seconds. Dr. Vance's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Security, now." 2 guards appeared at the entrance, confusion written on their faces. They had never been called to restrain a nurse before. Dr. Vance pointed at Ethan with a trembling finger, his face contorted with rage and humiliation. "This man assaulted me and performed an unauthorized medical procedure. Arrest him." The guards hesitated, looking between the surgeon and the nurse. Ethan stood motionless beside the patient, the needle still in his hand. Around him, his colleagues watched in stunned silence. Not one of them spoke up. Not one of them moved to defend him. The guards approached slowly, almost apologetically. One of them, an older man named Harold, who had worked at the hospital for over 20 years, met Ethan's eyes with something that looked like sympathy. But sympathy did not stop him from reaching for the handcuffs on his belt. Ethan set down the needle and held out his wrists without resistance. The cold metal clicked shut around his skin. He was led out of the emergency room in front of everyone he had worked with for the past 7 years. Doctors, nurses, technicians, all of them watching as the quiet single dad was escorted away like a criminal. Mia Parker stood near the supply closet, her hand pressed against her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks. The police station smelled like stale coffee and desperation. Ethan sat in an interrogation room for 3 hours before anyone came to take his statement. He told them everything, from the patient's symptoms to Dr. Vance's refusal to listen to the moment he was grabbed by the hair. The detective taking notes seemed skeptical, but not hostile. She asked if he had witnesses. Ethan said the entire ER staff was present. She asked if any of them would be willing to testify. Ethan could not answer that question. When they finally released him on his own recognizance, the sun was already setting. He had missed picking up Lucas from school. Mrs. Henderson was waiting at his apartment with Lucas when Ethan finally arrived home. The boy ran to his father and wrapped his arms around his legs, squeezing tight. His small voice was muffled against Ethan's jeans. "Daddy, Grandma Henderson said you had to work late, but you never work this late." Ethan knelt down to be at eye level with his son. Lucas's face was filled with worry that no 6-year-old should ever have to carry. Ethan wanted to lie, to protect him from the ugly truth, but the words stuck in his throat. All he could manage was a half-truth. "Daddy had some trouble at work today, buddy, but everything is going to be okay." Lucas studied his father's face with an intensity that seemed far too old for his years. His next question came out barely above a whisper. "Did you do something wrong, Daddy?" The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. He thought about the patient he saved, about the procedure he performed without authorization, about Dr. Vance's hand gripping his hair. Had he done something wrong? By the rules of the hospital, yes. By the laws of medicine, probably. But by the only law that mattered to him, the law of basic human decency, he had done the only thing he could. He pulled Lucas into a tight hug and held him for a long time. "No, buddy. Daddy did what was right. Sometimes that gets you in trouble." 3 days later, Ethan received an official notice of suspension pending investigation. The hospital's legal team had already built their case. He was accused of insubordination, assault on a superior, and practicing medicine beyond his scope of licensure. If convicted, he would lose his nursing license permanently. He would also face potential criminal charges. But the part that terrified him most was the final paragraph of the letter. Due to the serious nature of these allegations, Child Protective Services has been notified to conduct a welfare assessment of any minor children in your care. They were coming for Lucas. The first meeting with the hospital's lawyer took place in a sterile conference room downtown. Ethan sat alone on one side of the table, while 3 attorneys in expensive suits sat on the other. They slid a document across the polished wood surface, a settlement agreement. If Ethan signed, he would admit fault, accept termination, and agree never to speak publicly about the incident. In exchange, the hospital would drop all charges and recommend leniency from the medical board. The lawyer in the middle, a silver-haired man with cold eyes, delivered the offer with practiced efficiency. Sign this, and you walk away with your freedom. Refuse, and we will destroy you. Your career, your reputation, your custody of your son. Ethan picked up the document and read every word. His hands trembled slightly, but his mind was clear. He thought about Lucas waiting at home, about the life they had built together, about everything he stood to lose. The smart move was obvious. Sign the paper. Accept defeat. Move on. He picked up the pen they had provided. The lawyers watched him with the satisfied expressions of men who always got what they wanted. Ethan held the pen over the signature line for what felt like an eternity. Then he set it down and pushed the document back across the table. I need more time to think about it. The call came 2 days later, from a number Ethan did not recognize. The voice on the other end was female, young and nervous. Mr. Cole? This is Mia Parker. We work together in the ER. I need to talk to you, but not over the phone. Can you meet me? They agreed on a small coffee shop on the outskirts of town, far from the hospital and anyone who might recognize them. When Ethan arrived, Mia was already there, sitting in a corner booth with her hands wrapped around a cup she was not drinking. She looked like she had not slept in days. Mia spoke quickly, her words tumbling out in a rush of guilt and fear. She told Ethan about something that happened 2 years ago, before he transferred to St. Matthew's from his previous hospital. A patient had died under Dr. Vance's care, a routine surgery that went catastrophically wrong. The official report blamed complications, but everyone in the OR knew the truth. Vance had made a mistake, a critical error that any competent surgeon should have avoided. But instead of reporting it, the hospital covered it up. They altered the records, paid off the family, and silenced anyone who threatened to talk. One nurse, a woman named Sarah, had tried to file a complaint. She was gone within a month, her career destroyed by accusations of drug theft that Mia knew were fabricated. Ethan listened without interrupting. When Mia finished, he asked the question that had been forming in his mind. Why are you telling me this now? Mia's eyes filled with tears. Because I was there. I saw what really happened, and I said nothing. I was scared of losing my job, scared of what they would do to me. But then I watched him grab you by the hair in front of everyone, and I realized something. He's never going to stop. He's going to keep hurting people until someone makes him stop. She reached across the table and gripped Ethan's hand. I know you used to be a combat medic. I saw how you handled that patient. You're not like the rest of us. You actually have the courage to fight. Ethan pulled his hand back gently. The information Mia had given him changed everything. This was not just about his career, or even his freedom anymore. Dr. Marcus Vance was a danger to every patient who walked through those hospital doors, and the people in charge were protecting him. But courage alone would not be enough. He needed proof. He asked Mia if any evidence of the cover-up still existed. She shook her head slowly. They destroyed everything. The original surgical notes, the incident reports, even the security footage from that day. The only thing that might still exist is the backup from the camera system, but that's kept in a secure server room. Only IT and security have access. Over the next week, the hospital's campaign to destroy Ethan intensified. Internal memos circulated describing him as unstable and violent. Anonymous tips to local news outlets painted him as a disgruntled employee with a history of confrontation. Someone, he never found out who, reported him to Child Protective Services a second time, claiming he left Lucas alone at night while he worked. A social worker showed up at his apartment unannounced, asking questions about his parenting, his mental state, his ability to provide a stable home. Ethan answered everything calmly, but inside he was falling apart. They were coming at him from every angle, and he had nothing to fight back with. His former colleagues avoided him like he carried a disease. The few who responded to his calls made excuses or hung up quickly. One nurse, a man named Derek, who Ethan had considered a friend, met him briefly in a parking garage. Derek's message was blunt. "You need to let this go, Ethan. Vance has connections everywhere. The board, the medical association, even people in City Hall. You can't win this fight. No one can." Ethan asked if Derek would be willing to testify about what he saw that night. Derek laughed bitterly. "I have a wife and 2 kids. I'm not going to lose everything just because you decided to be a hero." He walked away without looking back. Mia called again, this time with worse news. The hospital had accelerated the deletion schedule for the security footage. The backup server was set to be wiped in 48 hours, just before the scheduled press conference, where the hospital planned to publicly announce Ethan's termination and the filing of criminal charges. If that footage disappeared, there would be no proof that Dr. Vance had ever touched him. It would be the word of a powerful surgeon against a suspended nurse. Ethan knew which version the world would believe. That night, Ethan sat alone in his darkened living room, surrounded by the wreckage of his life. The suspension notice lay on the coffee table. Next to it was the CPS assessment form, the hospital's settlement offer, and a stack of unpaid bills. His phone showed 17 missed calls from numbers he did not recognize, probably reporters looking for a quote. The apartment was quiet except for the sound of Lucas breathing in the next room. Ethan walked to his son's door and pushed it open gently. Lucas was asleep, his small body curled around a stuffed bear, his face peaceful and trusting. Ethan stood there for a long time, watching his son sleep. He thought about what would happen if he gave up now. The hospital would win. Vance would continue practicing medicine, continue making mistakes, continue destroying anyone who challenged him. And Lucas would grow up knowing that his father had been accused of terrible things, had been stripped of his career and his dignity, and had done nothing to fight back. What kind of lesson was that? What kind of father would that make him? The question Lucas had asked echoed in his mind. "Did you do something wrong, Daddy?" Ethan finally had his answer. He stepped out of Lucas's room and pulled out his phone. Mia answered on the second ring, her voice thick with sleep and worry. Ethan spoke quietly but firmly. "The footage gets deleted in 48 hours. We need to get it tonight." There was a long silence on the other end. When Mia responded, her voice was steady. "I still have my access badge. Security is lighter after midnight. If we're going to do this, we need to move now." Ethan looked back at his sleeping son one more time. Then he grabbed his jacket and walked out the door. He was done being the victim. It was time to fight. The hospital was different at night. The hallways that buzzed with frantic energy during the day now stretched empty and silent, lit only by the dim glow of emergency lights. Ethan and Mia entered through a side door near the loading dock, using her access badge to bypass the main entrance. Their footsteps echoed against the linoleum floors as they made their way toward the basement level where the server room was located. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing left to say. They both understood the risk they were taking and the consequences if they failed. The server room door required a secondary clearance that Mia did not have. They stood in the dim corridor, staring at the keypad, their plan suddenly hitting a wall. Ethan was about to suggest they try to find another way when a voice came from behind them. "You two are either very brave or very stupid." They spun around to find Harold, the old security guard who had handcuffed Ethan in the ER just weeks ago. He was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, watching them with an unreadable expression. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. This was it. They were caught. But Harold did not reach for his radio. Instead, he stepped closer and looked at Ethan with eyes that held decades of quiet observation. "I've worked at this hospital for 23 years. I've seen things that would make your head spin. Doctors who treated nurses like dirt. Administrators who cared more about money than patients. Cover-ups that would make politicians blush. He shook his head slowly. But I've also seen good people get crushed by the system because nobody had the guts to stand up for them. Ethan held his breath, waiting for what came next. Harold reached into his pocket and pulled out a small USB drive. He held it out toward Ethan. The old guard's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Last year, when my wife was in the ICU, you stayed with her all night when I couldn't get past visiting hours. You held her hand so she wouldn't be alone. You didn't have to do that." His eyes glistened under the fluorescent lights. "I never forgot. And when I saw what happened to you in that ER, I knew something was wrong. So I made a copy of the footage before they could erase it." Ethan took the USB drive with trembling fingers. It felt impossibly light for something that could change everything. He tried to find words to thank Harold, but the old man shook his head. "Don't thank me. Just do what's right." They were almost at the exit when the lights in the corridor suddenly flickered on. A figure stood at the end of the hallway, blocking their path. Dr. Marcus Vance looked like he had not slept in days. His usually immaculate hair was disheveled, his tie loosened, his eyes wild with a desperation Ethan had never seen before. He must have been alerted by someone in the building, or perhaps he had been waiting, knowing that Ethan would eventually try something like this. Either way, he stood between them and freedom, and his face made it clear he was not going to let them pass without a fight. Vance walked toward them slowly, his expensive shoes clicking against the floor. When he spoke, his voice was surprisingly calm, almost friendly. "Ethan, I have to admit I underestimated you. I thought you were just another weak-willed nurse who would fold under pressure." He stopped a few feet away, his eyes fixed on the USB drive in Ethan's hand. "But you're more stubborn than I expected. That's almost admirable." He tilted his head, studying Ethan like a specimen under a microscope. "So let me make you an offer. Give me that drive, and I'll make all of this go away. The charges, the investigation, the CPS case. Everything. I'll even write you a glowing recommendation for any hospital in the country." Ethan felt Mia tense beside him. The offer hung in the air, tempting in its simplicity. He thought about Lucas, about the life they could have if he just handed over the drive and walked away. No more fighting, no more fear. Just peace. But he also thought about the patient who almost died, because Vance refused to listen. He thought about Sarah, the nurse whose career was destroyed for trying to tell the truth. He thought about all the future patients who would suffer under the hands of a man who believed he was above consequences. The choice, in the end, was not really a choice at all. Ethan met Vance's eyes and spoke with a calm he did not know he possessed. "My whole life, I chose silence. I thought staying quiet would protect my son, protect my job, protect the little bit of stability I had managed to build." He took a step closer to Vance, close enough to see the fear flickering behind the surgeon's arrogant mask. But I was wrong. Silence doesn't protect anyone. It just gives people like you permission to keep hurting others. Vance's expression hardened. His voice turned cold. "You'll regret this. I will destroy you." Ethan shook his head slowly. "You already tried. I'm still standing." Then he walked past the surgeon, Mia following close behind, and neither of them looked back. The next morning, Ethan sent copies of the video to every major news outlet in the city, the state medical board, the police department, and the hospital's board of directors. He did not ask for money or special treatment. He simply attached a brief statement explaining what happened and let the footage speak for itself. The video was clear and damning. It showed Dr. Marcus Vance grabbing a male nurse by the hair and yanking him to his knees in front of a dying patient. It showed Ethan breaking free and performing the procedure that saved the patient's life. And it showed every single person in that room standing frozen, doing nothing to help. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Local news stations ran the story within hours. Social media exploded with outrage. Former patients and staff members, began coming forward with their own stories about Dr. Vance and the hospital's culture of intimidation. The family of the patient who died 2 years ago demanded answers. A state investigation was launched. Within 48 hours, the press conference that was supposed to announce Ethan's termination was canceled. Instead, the hospital board released a statement announcing that Dr. Marcus Vance had been placed on indefinite administrative leave pending a full investigation. 1 week later, Ethan watched the news from his living room as police officers escorted Dr. Vance out of his mansion in handcuffs. The charges included assault, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to falsify medical records. Several hospital administrators were also under investigation for their role in covering up past incidents. Mia Parker was recognized as a key witness and protected from any retaliation. Harold, the security guard, was quietly thanked by investigators for preserving crucial evidence. And Sarah, the nurse who had been forced out 2 years ago, finally got the chance to tell her story to people who would actually listen. The call from the hospital came on a Tuesday afternoon. Ethan almost did not answer, expecting more threats or legal notices, but the voice on the other end belonged to the new interim chief of medicine, a woman he had never met. Her tone was formal, but not unfriendly. She informed him that all charges against him had been dropped. His suspension had been lifted. He was welcome to return to work whenever he was ready. She also offered something that Ethan had never expected to hear from anyone at St. Matthew's Medical Center: an apology. Not a corporate non-apology filled with legal hedging, but a genuine acknowledgement that the hospital had failed him and that they were committed to doing better. Ethan returned to the emergency room on a quiet Wednesday morning. He walked through the same doors he had been escorted out of in handcuffs just weeks ago. The faces around him were familiar, but the way they looked at him was different. A young resident nodded at him with respect. A nurse he barely knew stopped to say thank you. Even the chaos of the ER seemed somehow less oppressive, as if a weight had been lifted from the entire department. Ethan changed into his scrubs, checked his assignment, and got to work. He did not make speeches or accept congratulations. He just did his job, the same way he had always done it. Quietly, competently, without complaint. That afternoon, Ethan left the hospital at the end of his shift and drove to Lucas's school. The boy was waiting by the front entrance, his backpack too big for his small frame, his face lighting up the moment he saw his father's car pull into the pickup lane. Lucas ran to the car and climbed into his booster seat, already talking about what happened during recess and what his teacher said about his drawing. Ethan listened to every word, his heart fuller than it had been in months. When they stopped at a red light, Lucas suddenly grew quiet. He looked at his father with those serious green eyes that always saw more than a 6-year-old should. His small voice cut through the silence of the car. "Daddy, did you have a good day at work today?" Ethan thought about everything that had happened. The fear, the humiliation, the moments when he had almost given up. He thought about the choice he made to stand up when everyone expected him to stay down. And he thought about the future stretching out before them, uncertain, but no longer hopeless. He reached back and squeezed his son's hand. "Yeah, buddy. Daddy did something good today." Lucas smiled, satisfied with the answer, and went back to chattering about dinosaurs and rocket ships. Ethan drove them home through the afternoon traffic, a quiet man who had finally found his voice. He was never going to be silent again.